When reflecting on my childhood, I consider that there was a particular decision my parents made that had a profound influence on the way I would come to view stories, the fantasy genre, and video games as a storytelling medium in general. That decision, prior to Christmas 1999, was whether to buy my brother and I a PlayStation or a Nintendo 64. A largely inconsequential decision as far as they were concerned. However, on a personal level, this was anything but. Their decision to gift us an N64 brought me more joy in the years that followed than I could ever adequately express now. And though there are many experiences on the console that shaped and contributed to that sense of joy and connection to the art form, there is one game that stood head and shoulders above all the rest. The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time. I purchased Ocarina of Time entirely on the basis that Nintendo Official Magazine in the UK touted it, as just about every other gaming magazine in the world did, as a must-buy, essential to any owner's library. And when I slotted the cartridge in for the first time, I had no idea of the gravity of what I was about to experience. This video is a love letter to a game that helped shape my opinions on maturity, heroism, friendship, duty, and the impact that one person can have on the world around them. The first question I ask myself in this is, what is it really that made Ocarina of Time so special? Which in another way is to ask, what set it apart from other video games in its era? The most obvious answer to me, as an aspiring storyteller, is its narrative. In the opening minutes, we are presented with an ominous portent. And truly, of all other titles, I can think of no other game in which the opening has so much silence. A creative decision that sets the sort of tone that games in the 90s simply didn't risk to take. In a market where an abundance of colour and sound were so important to convey what exactly the experience was going to be like, Ocarina, right from the off, sets itself apart from just about everything else. The story begins with a presentation of a paradise stricken with a momentous and unanticipated death, the death of the Great Deku Tree. Our hero must leave this paradise, the only world he has ever known, to fulfill the wishes of his late spiritual father, and in doing so prevent the destruction of this world, Hyrule, at large. However, in a narrative structure few games dared to explore prior to Ocarina's release, our hero, Link, is, at least for a time, doomed to fail. Destruction that verges on apocalypse is, no matter how one progresses through the story, inevitable. Not the choices made nor the skill of the player can prevent it. And that, to a young mind in control of all else happening on the screen, instills a sense of responsibility over all that has happened. Ocarina is, at its heart, a coming-of-age story. However, unlike many such stories that filled the popular landscape of the time, the protagonist in this narrative does not experience the inherently linear nature of adolescent growth. In To Kill a Mockingbird, Great Expectations, or even to an extent the Harry Potter series, the protagonists encounter adversity, as is the mainstay of just about every coming-of-age story, or any story for that matter. But the thing all these heroes have in seeming abundance is time. Time, of course, is so central to the narrative and gameplay structure of Ocarina that the game would not be half what it is without it as its central theme. As a supposed Kokiri, Link was never meant to grow up, and yet in attempting to prevent Ganondorf from entering the Sacred Realm, pulling the Master Sword from its pedestal, 7 years pass in what feels to him an instant. The impact of this on Link's character arc is not only that time is stolen from him, but that he loses all semblance of identity in the process. His spiritual father is of course still deceased, his home, once a paradise, is ravaged by monsters, and he now inhabits an adolescent body a Kokiri was never meant to. All he ever knew, all he ever loved or held dear, is damaged. Considering the split timeline Ocarina establishes in the series, It is implied officially that this damage is irreparable. What is done in this adult timeline cannot be undone. Now, I recognise that in the other coming-of-age examples I have given, there is plenty of loss and irreparable damage that shapes and challenges the protagonists. But in Ocarina's case, what makes the realisation of what the world has become in taking up the Master Sword so harrowing is that Link was never even given a choice. Because the Master Sword, in its ethereal wisdom, determined that he was not yet ready for the trials that lay ahead of him. Unlike other traditional story arcs, Link is not given a choice in the sacrifice made. It is forced upon him in a medium where player choice has since become the determinant of what sacrifices will or won't be made, such as in the Mass Effect series or the Infamous series, to name but two examples. As players who can do nothing but bear witness to this celestial decision that is so out of our hands or the inputs of our controller, we feel the full weight of this burden. In order to even approach the mantle of what yet required on Link's part exceptional exertion and effort and courage, he first had to lose everything, merely to enter a world in which Hyrule has succumbed at all points to terror. Entering the castle market for the first time as an adult is, as has been established by my peers and I know fans alike, the most raw experience of this. Stalls and shops once bustling with life and the undercurrent of joyful music have long been laid to waste. There is broken stone, splintered beams, and, most terrifying of all, its inhabitants, which have become the Zelda franchise's rendition of the undead, the re-dead, beings who were once people, now feeding on what is left of the living. The stark reality of what 7 tumultuous years had done to Hyrule instilled in me as a boy genuine anxiety, and I contemplate only really now, as an adult, that a large part of what made that experience difficult to accept is that it is steeped in the two immensely powerful emotions of guilt and shame. This more precisely stems from a feeling that the world is in ruins because of Link's absence, because of the factors at play outside of our protagonist's control. It's because of this that the fervent desire to put this world to rights, this world which of course exists merely as a complex amalgam of ones and zeros, becomes the player's most heartfelt wish. And this is a strong element, I think, as to why so many people who played it and saw it through to the end have some of their most nostalgic and lasting memories of the game here. Link's personal sacrifices in this are made unwillingly, unknowingly, and are in stark contrast to all that the player experiences in the opening stages of the game. My YouTube peers have rightly established the key theme in the game as a struggle between the noble ambition of adulthood versus the childish mind of youth, and in examining what makes Ocarina unique, this cannot be overstated. In most Zelda games, Link is a boy overcoming a far more mature form of evil. The innocence of youth overcomes the base desires of a developed, mature, and often cynical threat. However, Ocarina is the first in the series in which it is established that in order to overcome the challenges that would see a world fall to ruin, one must accept that the limitations of one's youth must be overcome. In Link's case, in an instant. Sacrifice, in fact, is hardly exclusive to our player avatar Link. Saria, upon awakening as a sage, admits, "It is destiny that you and I can't live in the same world." We understand by this that her sacrifice is the relationship they once had. Darunia has no choice but to face the dragon Volvagia because it would otherwise escape Death Mountain and turn Hyrule, in his words, into a burning wasteland. It is not explicit in the story if any of the sages perish before awakening as such, but many theorists believe that in fending off Volvagia, without the Megaton Hammer, Darunia gave his life to buy Link the time he needed to complete the task himself. Indeed, the theory that each of the sages actually do die before awakening is, in my mind, invitingly convincing. They gave their lives to ascend to a state where they can, with Link's help, seal away the ultimate evil in this world. But to what extent that theory may extend to Princess Zelda herself, well, the Zelda community can only speculate. What is certain is that Zelda's sacrifices in the game are as documented as anyone's. I would love to go into greater detail here about the significance of what assuming a different gender really means to Zelda's character, but my surface opinion is that it was merely to throw the player off the scent of the ultimate twist of what really happened to Zelda in the intervening years. To go deeper than that, I feel, would be deserving of a video in its own right. When one considers what the driving force of all this sacrifice really stems from, it can be summed up most neatly with the famed quote from Zelda while she is donning the guise of Sheik. "The flow of time is always cruel." What this line intends to signal to the player, I think, is that though Link suffered his sacrifices at the drop of a coin, those who he had left behind had to suffer theirs linearly, and as the nature of time intended. 7 years in this hell has felt like an eternity for them, and that is something that only Link is lucky enough to have been spared. After all this adversity has been endured, and Ganondorf overcome, as the player sighs his or her first wounded sigh in completion of the story, we are granted the sight of what we and Link had been fighting for all along: a world mended, a world put to rights. It is climactic, endearing, heartfelt, and to most Zelda fans deeply personal. One takes on the mental state in that credit scene, I think, of Frodo Baggins, in that we are so vicariously browbeaten and drained by the daunting final fight, we think, it's done. It's over. Even when one considers that Ocarina predates the Return of the King's theatrical release by over 5 years. And though I felt in my adolescent heart completeness and tranquility upon the story's end, we have learned in the decades since Ocarina's release that not every sacrifice was over, because of course no sacrifices in life ever truly are. It is confirmed in Nintendo's Hyrule Historia that the character of the hero Shade in Twilight Princess is in fact our Link from this world. He became this undead entity because he lamented never being remembered as a hero, and did not pass down his skills to the next generation. There is much speculation about how or why this may be the case, but what is certain in this is that Link's suffering, and his sacrifices, extend beyond the experience of Ocarina as a narrative. In the legacy of the series, the Link in this game is given the title of Hero of Time, but in writing this essay I realised this title is not in essence merely a title of reverence. It also signifies the curse that Link must endure as someone who can never return home, never return to the everlasting childhood he had. He, unlike all he knew in the forest, is subject to time's cruel flow. He grows old, he dies, and officially he dies with regret. Just another example of how time is the true adversity that Link is destined never to overcome. The moniker of Hero of Time, in truth, paints him as the ultimate victim and the ultimate sacrifice. In completing the story of this game, I felt motions of adversity, friendship, the duty that was laid upon me even though this world doesn't exist, and most importantly I felt myself mature, growing with the game at a time in my life when I was just beginning to scratch the surface of who I was. Thank you for watching.